Conflict. Most of us, when we think of conflict, we think of it from negative terms. It's bad, it's to be avoided, it's scary, all of these things. But we really want to focus in and have a conversation about conflict from how it's helpful, the positive side on that. And so, Steve, I'm going to maybe just first turn it to you. And for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Steve, Steve is one of our master coaches. He is in Calgary and has been a part of Rhapsody since the beginning. He's been really around us and is somebody who is absolutely, he loves conflict. He embraces it. He celebrates it. He is constantly leading conflict at Rhapsody. And he does everything he can. So no, not really. Steve would be the opposite of that. He is a peacemaker. And so I thought he's the great person to talk about conflict because he would be somebody that maybe wouldn't embrace the positiveness of conflict. So Steve, sell me on the idea that conflict can be good.
Well, first of all, if 5 years ago you would have told me I was on a webinar encouraging people to nurture more conflict, I would say no way, not in a million years. I am naturally conflict averse, and really I think this idea of conflict really starts with a great question, a personal question, and that is, what is my relationship with conflict? What is my relationship like with conflict? If we have a negative, a reactive, a painful vibe or energy around it, then it's very difficult to engage it more, to nurture it, to invite it, to welcome it, to plan for it. And so certainly one of the first things we want to do is shift our mindset and shift our belief system to say that conflict is good. In fact, most of the good things that I have in my life can be connected to a healthy pattern of leveraging and walking through conflict. And most of the painful stuff in my life can be connected to avoiding conflict or having an unhealthy relationship with it. So I really want to say, I want to improve my relationship with conflict. I want to be able to hold my composure when things get uncomfortable. I want to be able to maximize situations and settings so that I can move my life forward, move my organization forward, moving my business forward. Most of us love conflict when it's in a great movie or a great book. In fact, the more conflict that's in a movie or a book, the better the story is. There's opportunity for transformation and resolution and overcoming obstacles. And we all have a story. We all have a story, a dream, something that we're reaching for. And the more conflict that we can have in our story, the more healthy conflict, of course, that we can have in our story, the more resolution and progress, adventure, achievement will happen. So yeah, let's get into a good relationship with conflict.
So Steve, you've already started some conflict because in the chat window, there's a number of observations around the fact that that's about the worst Irish accent we've ever seen. So, but
you should hear me when I'm not doing the Irish accent.
That's right. So conflict, you're right. We certainly love conflict when it comes to, as you mentioned, books or movies. Without it, we'd really find it boring. So talk to me. If we've got to shift our mindset, what are some of the benefits of embracing conflict within an organization?
Yeah, so the real big thought here today, we only have a few minutes to chat about it, but there's different kinds of conflict in different settings, but what we're really championing is conflict around ideas. Conflict around ideas. The word conflict originates from the Latin word conflictus, which means to strike together. And so what we're talking about are ideas being struck together so that the best idea will emerge. We're not talking about human beings striking against each other, personal attacks, turning meetings into a living hell because everybody's at each other's throats. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about what can happen in an organization when the best ideas emerge, when ideas are striking together. Imagine being in a room with leaders where everybody is weighing in, everybody's bringing their idea to the table. And out of all of those ideas, through this striking together, the very best idea emerges. And that's why we're really championing this idea of have more conflict, because more conflict will produce the best ideas. And it really starts with, what do we want? What do we want? Do we want lively and engaged meetings? Yes or no? Do you want lively and engaged meetings? Do you want to extract and exploit ideas from all the team members, getting everybody involved? Do we want to solve real problems quickly? Do we want to minimize politics? Hey-oh, do we want to minimize politics in our organizations? Do we want to put the critical topics, the things that really matter? Do we want to put those things on the table? And I think the answer to most of those questions is yes, we want those things in our organization. And those things happen when there's healthy conflict in an organization.
So what would you say to the person who is, as you described yourself, conflict averse? I'm a leader in an organization. I get what you're saying about, yes, I want all those things. But as soon as there's conflict in a environment, a meeting or something like that, my first reaction is to kind of shut it down, is to stop it from happening. What would you say to that?
Yeah, there is an instinct. It's almost like a reflex. It's a duck. Conflict is coming, we duck. For me, I lean on humor. I'll start cracking jokes, lighten the mood, try to change the energy in the room because I don't want it. But when I do that, I really take away the power of wrestling an issue to a point where the best idea emerges. And a lot of times we default to this word consensus. And a lot of us, we move to that. We think, well, we want to come to a consensus here. That's the goal. We want to try to find consensus. And really, to me, consensus has become a bit of a four-letter word because consensus doesn't want the best ideas. Consensus wants consensus. And our organization doesn't need consensus. Our organization needs the best ideas. And so, for example, if you're arguing between two great colors, you've got green on St. Patrick's Day, and we want green on our wall, and someone says, no, we want red, and consensus is okay, we're going to agree on beige. That's the consensus, is beige. And a lot of organizations are beige. A lot of teams are beige. A lot of marketing programs are beige. And there's no real vibrancy. The best ideas haven't emerged. And so not pulling away from conflict, but leaning into it. In fact, planning for it, nurturing it, inviting it will allow us to stop that consensus mindset and move into what we like to call at Rhapsody Strategies, dangerous conversations. Conversations that are dangerous, not to the people involved in the conversation, but they're dangerous to weak ideas. Weak ideas get nervous around dangerous conversations because we're not afraid to agree, to disagree, to challenge, to say, what about this? Have we thought about that? Let me try thinking outside the box here. Let me push back on what you said there. And all of that energy in that conversation really produces great things. One of my favorite quotes, Rob, and you've heard it before, friends of mine on the call, you've probably heard me say this, that every organization is the sum of its conversations. Every organization is the sum of its conversations. And so if we're having really dynamic, open, honest, thought-provoking, engaging conversations that allow for everybody on the team to weigh in, then we're gonna come up with some fantastic ideas that will help us stand out from the crowd. It'll help us move our organizations forward and help us solve problems.
I wish you would get a little bit excited and be a bit more demonstrative and around this notion. It almost sounds, because, again, like, okay, let's just let conflict happen everywhere all the time in every situation. And that sounds a bit tiring to me. So how do we be deliberate with conflict? Where should we be looking to be purposeful with introducing or inviting conflict? Are there certain scenarios where that is most helpful?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. We're not talking about chaos. We're not talking about arguments in the hallway. We're not talking about interruptions to normal workflow, because it's time we have this out now. In fact, one of the ways that we can nurture conflict is actually make sure that it's done in a setting, at a time when it's most appropriate, when it makes the most sense, when the right people are in the room, when the right information is in the room. And so I really like to bring this principle into any conflict, and that's frame a meeting in advance, because we don't want to ambush people. We don't want for there to be surprise. That's when defensiveness comes up. So we try to frame meetings in almost all of our coaching sessions, including helping our clients know how to frame a meeting that's going to contain conflict. And that's just as simple as saying, at the next meeting, we're going to bring this topic forward. We really want to discover what the best solution is. So come ready to debate, discuss, argue, disagree, because we really want to wrestle this issue to the ground. So bringing order around conflict, for a lot of us, we avoid conflict because there's always been some chaos or unpredictability about it. It's been reactive. So if we take it out of that reactive, unpredictable zone, plan it, organize it, frame it, then it certainly helps it become a more healthy and robust conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I love the notion of the framing and inviting people into that concept. Now, again, and I've heard this often when I talk about conflict with clients, with business owners and leaders. I often hear two kind of yeah buts, objections to it. At times it's yes, but every time I introduce conflict or I allow for there to be debate around an idea, it basically it becomes personal. The meeting goes to hell. It becomes this horrible thing. Or I hear sometimes business owners say, but I don't really want people to debate the idea because I already know what I want them to do. I just want them to go and do it. So how do you master conflict, and how do you address whether it's those two kind of fears or yeah, but statements or others? What would be some practical, we've got about 6 minutes left in this part. So what would be some practical things we need to keep in mind to master conflict?
Yeah, so let me introduce two ideas quickly. We won't be able to unpack them all, but the first one is the idea of the conflict continuum. If you're taking notes, just jot that down, the conflict continuum. So on one end of the continuum, we have what's called artificial harmony. So we're all just pretend that we're getting along. We all pretend to agree. We nod our head in the meeting, but after the meeting, we disagree. We're political. So we have artificial harmony. And on the other end of the continuum is what we call hell. Just attacking, vicious, personal attacks that leave hurt feelings, swearing, expletives, who knows what's going to happen, chair throwing. Whatever may happen. And believe me, I've worked in the construction industry, so that happens. So what we want, we don't want either one of those. And we don't have to have either one of those. So good leaders move the conversation towards this sweet spot in the middle. Now, from time to time, we're going to cross over into moving towards that hell side, but good leaders know how to bring it back. And usually when we cross over and when we bring it back, and we've all had experience when it's done well, it brings the team closer together. We know we can get close, we can get passionate, we can share our true feelings about ideas and subjects. So that's important. So you don't have to be on one end or the other. There is a sweet spot that a leader can nurture. And then the other thought that I just mentioned in a moment, and that is really good conflict has to rest on something. It doesn't do well just in a vacuum, and it rests on trust. And so even before you start to say, okay, we're going to have a new emphasis on conflict in our organization, there is a step before that, and that is make sure that your team are trusting one another. And in fact, one of the training courses that we offer, we really emphasize these behaviors of trust and conflict and commitment. If you weigh in, you'll buy in, as part of a larger strategy of making sure that conflict is part of a cohesive team dynamic. The other thing, of course, and maybe we can chat about this a little bit in the question and answer part, but we also want to have some guidelines around conflict. Trust is great too, but around conflict. What are acceptable behaviors or unacceptable behaviors during times of conflict, and put some ground rules, and that helps people feel safer. They know that when they're going to go into a conflict environment, we've predetermined what behaviors are acceptable or not in that conflict. And of course, from time to time, again, we'll cross over and start to go towards that hell zone again, but good leaders bring it back and say, hey, remember what we agreed upon in advance, and let's keep to our healthy conflict behaviors.
Yeah, and I think, I love that idea, Steve, and the notion of setting those ground rules, having here's how we play in this world of conflict, and here's what's allowed and what's not allowed, because people do approach conflict from very different places. We often, of course, one of our tools that we use quite regularly at Rhapsody is DISC. Talk to me a little bit about the value of what DISC provides, or just the understanding people. What does that do when it comes to making sure that conflict is in that nice sweet spot of where it is challenging?
Rob, one of my very first engagements when I became a Rhapsody coach was a mediation of between partners that were in horrible conflict. They were attempting to buy, sell, succession strategy. And I still don't like a conflict. I've learned to embrace it, but it was a nightmare. Getting ready to go into that meeting and mediate this real nasty conflict. So the very first thing that I did is I had them all do a very comprehensive DISC assessment. And before we got, they fill out the forms, the online assessment, they all got their reports. And before we started to dive into any of the issues on the table, we spent an hour, first of all, getting to know each other's DISC styles and the priorities that we bring to the table, the communication styles, what matters most, how to interact better, how those DISC styles can interact better with each other. And that set the tone for the rest of the meeting, because now there was an understanding of how somebody's wired, or how somebody reacts to challenging things, including conflict. For example, an S in that DISC style is quite likely to get quiet. Just be quiet, withdraw, and not speak up for their rights or what they really think. And so if you know you have an S in a room and you're a different DISC style, then your job is to ask the S questions, draw them out, get their ideas out onto the table. So there's so many ways to apply DISC, but certainly conflict is one of them. That's where I've done a lot of my work personally as a leader, is recognizing my DISC style. What are my healthy and unhealthy conflict behaviors? There's a beautiful chart that I go over with teams. What is their healthy and unhealthy response according to their DISC style? So I get to know myself better, so I can pause and reflect and not react. And then I want to know my team better, the people that I'm in the conflict with, so I can better navigate those conversations.
And it's interesting, the training you mentioned, we have, of course, Rhapsody, we put together a training called High Performance, Building a High Performance Team. Part of it is based on, and some of the content that we have talked about today is based on Patrick Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, where all Rhapsody coaches are certified in providing the assessments around that, where we can do assessments for organizations around how they rate themselves on trust and on conflict, as well as some other areas. And we dive into as well in this, some conversations around productive conflict, where we rethink before we think before we speak, basically, and approach that. I think you're right. DISC is such a key element. Part of a good leader is to be able to, when you're starting to introduce conflict to a team, would be to invite people to share what their approach is to conflict, how they feel when conflict comes. And to your point, you'll hear that from their DISC assessment. Sometimes it's a cultural thing. Some of us grew up in homes where, everybody was loud and, all of this, where some would be very quiet. There's so many pieces or dynamics to that, wouldn't there be?
Yeah. And here's the thing. We don't have conflict just for the sake of having conflict, which might be true in some families or in some cultures. Right. It's just kind of the dinner is conflict. So that's, we're not really talking about necessarily that. We're talking about to get to a level of commitment and buy-in. And here's a quote that I love: people won't buy in unless they first weigh in. They feel heard. They feel like their idea was listened to. And I think as leaders, as business owners, as nonprofit directors, what we want most of all is we want our staff and our team to buy in. We want them to be fully engaged. But if they don't feel listened to, then they really won't completely engage. And that brings back to that one other point that you mentioned. What about it? What about the leader who already comes to the table with a predetermined decision, doesn't want to have any conversations, doesn't want to have any conflict because they've already got the idea set in their brain? Well, that's one way to lead, but you probably will not have a highly engaged team. People won't feel listened to. They won't feel they can use their creativity. They won't bring their best to the table. And eventually they'll check out. They'll check out with their heads. They'll check out with their hands, and probably move on, because people really, they want to engage, but again, they won't buy in unless they're able to weigh in.
Steve, that was an absolute brilliant way of bringing it around full circle. Right as we wrap up time, you're able to bring it back to that. Let me leave it. One last question for you. Call to action. If you were to, for people that are on the call, people that watch the video at any time, if there's one thing you would say, this is where you start, this is the critical piece to doing conflict well, what would you say is the one thing that they need to make sure they do right?
I would just look at your meetings, which, by the way, we have our next webinar is around meetings. So this will be, I encourage you to tune into that. But I'd really look at your meetings and how you structure them. And are they just sort of thrown together? Have you set ground rules around what's acceptable or unacceptable behavior? And just having a conversation around that will empower and make people realize we're bringing conflict. It's kind of behind the bushes there, hiding. We're bringing it out into the open. We're determining that we're going to have better conflict, more conflict, and then have a really good open conversation. Okay, what's healthy? What's a healthy conflict? Are we allowed to raise our voice? Are we not allowed to raise our voice? Are we allowed to go past the end of the meeting time to wrestle it to the ground, or do we always end right on time? Just some real practical things around what's acceptable or unacceptable conflict behavior.
Awesome. Real great stuff, Steve, for sure. I am excited. Our next webinar, I should say, is on April the 21st. And that is going to be around the conversation of, as Steve, as you've mentioned, it's around meetings. Meetings were always something that kind of, for most organizations, most businesses, they sucked. They were often draining and not a lot of fun to be at. It's been even more of a challenge now that most of our meetings are done by Zoom. And so we're going to talk about some real practical ways to enhance those meetings, to invite conflict into meetings, but to go further than that and to really just talk about what are some of the ways you can set up and frame meetings so that they're done really well. So I'm real excited about that. I know that Eric is going to be, I think, leading the conversation on that, and it's going to be excellent as well. So really do hope that people can join us for that. So here's what we're gonna wrap up the video the live video piece of our call at this point, and then we're going to just invite some conversation. And so for those of you that can stick around for another 10 minutes, we certainly would love to hear some thoughts and maybe some other comments or questions that you might have for Steve or for others. But for those that do need to go, thank you so much for being part of the call. So let's take an extra 10 minutes here and open it up. Who wants to jump in? Some thoughts, some questions. I know there was some great, stuff going on in the chat. Always appreciate the Rhapsody coaches grabbing some of Steve's quotes and then kind of capturing them there for us to have them. But I know there was some other stuff that was great in there. I love that there was a bunch of conversations or comments around consensus. I think lots of people on this call, Steve, agreed with you that consensus is a four-letter word. So any thoughts, any comments? Anyone want to ask a question or add a thought to what Steve has shared, an experience that you've had in how you handle conflict in your organization? Jill, I see you're asking about, what about narcissists?
Ooh, that's a great question. Trevor?
Fire them.
I don't know how to take that, Steve. You know, it's interesting because in essence, narcissism is a bit of a disorder in some ways. Like the wiring is a little bit different. And so it's like trying to say, you know, someone is wrestling with a core issue there. And frankly, with a narcissist, unless they're ultimately able to do the work on themselves in order to move beyond it and manage it, then the rules here don't apply in the same way. They don't apply in the same way, right? Because this is all based on rational individuals working through things that are uncomfortable or difficult, you know, to recognize that there's going to be things that we feel uncomfortable doing, but we're able to structure it in a way where the rules are such a clear playing field for it, and to cue people up in advance to say, listen, our goal here is to come up with the best ideas. Our ideas are going to collide and be different. We want the ideas to collide and to yield the best one, but without doing any damage to people. Right? We shouldn't be attacking one another's characters or bringing up those kinds of things. You know, kind of the character assassination, demeaning, all of that kind of stuff. And those are part of the guidelines, Steve, that you mentioned that organizations need to put in place. The challenge is with the narcissist, if you look at it from a kind of a clinical perspective, is that they may well think they're already doing that, or they absolutely won't care that they're not. And so you end up kind of caught in between. So I think that's a case where, you know, you've got to try and recognize it where you can. And sometimes it's just part of the equation. And that's a very difficult environment to be able to have productive conflict when one person doesn't want to be productive about the conflict. They just want to get what they want.
Yeah, I definitely took a test online to see if I was a narcissist. I would recommend that for everybody, because when it first started being talked about, I thought, oh no, I hope I'm not one, because if you are one, you don't usually know. And so I anonymously took a test, and I'm only a narcissist on Wednesdays. I feel that's today.
Yeah.
So this is really all about me right now.
That's good. Other thoughts, other comments. By the way, I'm chuckling because I just realized how creative some of you are with your names. I mean, we already have a lot of McConnells and McGregors and, all of this. We've got all these other now, Wozniak. I just don't think that that's an Irish name, Marta, but good try. But yeah, it's pretty creative, some of your names. Comments, thoughts? How have you handled or addressed conflict within your organization?
I think I rushed through some of the behaviors. I see that Sherry asked, what are some healthy ground rules? I think in my exuberance there, I probably rushed through. So I'll list through some of those a little slower. First of all, do we go beyond meeting times to resolve issues? That's a ground rule. We say yes or no. Is it acceptable to avoid outward emotions? Are we allowed to express emotions? And if so, then what what are acceptable or unacceptable. Using strong language. What language is acceptable or unacceptable in our meetings? Excluding other team members from difficult conversations. What's the ground rule around that? Expressing anger through indirect actions rather than voicing it directly, so the passive aggressive stuff. Speaking twice in a meeting before everybody speaks once might be a ground rule that you don't allow. So those are some possibilities, but you can certainly create some on your own as well. Things that work in your culture and work with your team.
Steve, one other thing that I've found really useful for teams when they're creating these ground rules is to have a discussion on how they are going to implement those ground rules. Like if you're going to tell somebody, hey, you spoke already, how are you going to do that everybody agrees upon so that nobody's feeling like they just got attacked, that they agreed to it in advance? It really helps pave the way for those ground rules working.
Excellent.
I think that's great. Joe's got a great question in the chat window. I think that one's, I'm so glad he raised it, about picking your battles. Do you really want to speak up every time, or should you decide when? What do you say to that, Steve?
Yeah, well, yes, you pick your battles, but my problem is I'll pick as few battles as possible. So that, again, that's part of knowing myself. But maybe if you know your disc style might have a tendency to pick a battle about everything. So I think it really starts with self-awareness and what is my relationship like with conflict? Is it healthy? Do I just like to have battles for the sake of having battles? That might be interesting, but it might not help your team. It might not help your organization. So for me, taking a look inside and say, okay, what kind of a relationship do I want to have with conflict? And then from there, decide what battles am I avoiding, or am I creating conflict just for the sake of creating it, and look at it that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, and I know for example, with my disc style, oftentimes I may be thinking something and thinking, maybe I'm going to say something that will challenge what's being, discussed, or the idea that's kind of being, seems to be taking predominance. But in my mind, I'll think, well, they've already thought it. I'm sure somebody's thought of that. And if nobody's bringing it up, it probably doesn't matter. And the few times when I do sometimes say, well, what about this? Sometimes people are like, oh my God, never thought, and then I'm always grateful that I brought it up. But my tendency will be somebody would bring that up if it was important. So you're right. It's I think knowing disc style is so important and so critical. And I love Craig's question there about what happens I have a team that I'm training right now where every single person in the team is in the C area except for one person. The entire group is in that same area. And we talked about, so some of the advantages of that is oftentimes, I think in disc, when you're all part of the same style, is the way you debate or discuss can be very similar. Your communication style is often, so in this case, they're all C's. So they all love to get into a lot of detail. They get into a lot of weeds. They kind of, there's lots that's going on there when they're having conversations. The challenge with that approach is you miss other perspectives completely. And if you're not able to shift out of that, you don't see some of those other perspectives. But I think there can be both advantages and disadvantages of having a big group in the same style, for sure. We have time for one more comment question. Trevor.
Rob, maybe I can just add a couple of comments there. Remember with disc, your disc style is your starting point, not your ending point. So regardless of where you are in the style, we've all got full capability to bring the behaviors of any of those four styles. And really, our leadership mandate is to look at the situation, the conversation, the questions in front of us, and start to say what's required here. And sometimes we need to choose to be deeply analytical. Sometimes we need to drive things forward. Sometimes we need to brainstorm. Sometimes we need to rally the troops, whatever that is. But it's to recognize that we are not captives of our style. And so that will be one. The challenge is in moments of stress or conflict, we tend to retreat to what's familiar and well known. And so that's the moment where we really do need to push ourselves a little bit further in order to embrace those other behaviors. The other thought, just quickly, I wanted to offer around Joe's question, which I just think is fantastic. I think it is worth picking battles. And in essence, in our role in an organization, our job is to look and say, where can I contribute? Where can I make meaningful contribution here? If it's a topic you know nothing about, it affects you not at all, it's someone else there, you might say, I'm not sure I need to weigh in there. However, if you think you've got insight that can help your team, that can help your organization come up with the best idea, then there's a bit of an accountability to actually bring those ideas forward. So that would be the first one. To your second question there around, I think sometimes you have to go to the group even when there's no agreement. Conflict is not about agreement. So it is not about getting everyone to agree. It's about trying to identify the best idea. And there are moments when we need to disagree, come in with a differing opinion, a different view, a different perspective, a different idea. But at the end, the conversation may reveal that that's not the best idea, that another idea is the one that's going to serve the organization best. And I think the test for us in those moments is for us to come in with a different view, to disagree, but then to commit, to fully commit to the choice that gets made. So even when, and so that's a little bit different to say, listen, I'm just going to go with the group, even if there's not agreements. Go, no, that's okay. The conflict is there to make sure we're all heard. And part of our job, I think, in good conflict is making sure everyone does feel heard. And sometimes you can literally ask them, just say, let me make sure I've understood this. Did I get it right? And then we can start to bring competing ideas to it. Is a really powerful way to do that. But the goal is not to say, do we all agree? It's to say, have we got the best? Do we agree this is the best idea moving forward? And to embrace that. So that would be my encouragement to you there.
Thank you so much. And I think it's, one of the things that we do, and perhaps we'll talk about this next month in meetings, at the end of every meeting at Rhapsody, every meeting on a scale, we ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, how valuable, how helpful was this meeting? And we're always aiming for meetings to have a high value in the way, and the ones that get the 10s are the ones in which everyone on the team has contributed and participated and been engaged. And we see that time and time again. So, hey, listen, thanks everyone for being a part of the call. I hope that you found this helpful. I certainly encourage you, for those of you that are connected to us on Facebook, you'll see that the call will, it's been live there the first 30 minutes. If you have a few moments, if you could help us out and reshare that on your timeline, we deeply appreciate it. It's a great opportunity for us to connect to more people. And then the videos are also all available on our YouTube channel, Steve, Trevor? Yeah, they go on our YouTube channel and on our website. So certainly an opportunity for you to share those as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your St. Patrick's Day, and hope that many of you can join us next month. Thanks again.